Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday. I'll be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. We've got another great show, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Well, we're going to kick things off with a look at what's going on Capitol Hill. And what's going on these days is there's a lot of focus on retirement. And basically, a new bill was put forth, this time in the U.S. Senate. It's called the Improving Access to Retirement Savings Act. And here to join us to break it down, what it means, and a lot more are two gentlemen better known as the Legal Eagles, David Levine, Kevin Walsh. Both are principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, so great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Jeff, it's always great talking to you. And, as the weather heats up, congressional attention to the retirement system seems to be heating up as we see more and more legislation introduced. I think today David's going to talk a bit about some new legislation that was introduced on Wednesday, which, to some readers has less the second time you read it than it does the first time.
Yeah. It's all about reading comprehension, David.
It's all about reading comprehension. I think, and David's a strong reader is a good thing.
Well, for our listeners, this is the second time we're recording this segment because we realized that there's so many bills out there where we're starting to talk about the wrong bill the first time, so we figured we better start over. But I think that highlights the key reason why this is. And thank you, Jeff, in the A block this week.
Yep.
For very simply put, retirement legislation keeps popping up like crocuses at the beginning of spring. Every day, there's a new flower of legislation that emerges from the ground. I thought you would like that.
Yeah, it's very springy.
It's not like cicadas in May.
I was going to bring up the cicada issue.
Well, cicadas are a DC swamp type of thing because brood 10 only appears in certain areas. And I feel it's not appropriate to use a reference that people in most of the country won't get.
So David, you're trying to. Okay, go on.
You need to move out from outside of your inside the Beltway view and be more broad in your view of the world we're living in. Remember, just because you live inside the Beltway doesn't mean everybody else does.
David, I think we all have a collective interest in reaching out more broadly.
I agree. I think collectivization and collective insight.
I trust that you'll get this right.
I absolutely will, Kevin. All right, so let's jump in because our readers are probably wondering, why are they laughing so much?
Yeah, we're having fun, guys. It's all good.
Wait, I said readers, listeners. I hope you're not reading this.
Well, they do. Maybe they're reading the transcribed version if they choose to transcribe it. Anyway, go ahead, David.
Okay, so we have legislation. As Jeff mentioned, the Improving Access to Retirement Savings Act, introduced, again, on a bipartisan basis by Senator Grassley, Republican, Senator Hassan, Democrat, and Senator Langford, Republican. And it's not as big as the Secure 2.0 bill that we've been talking about last week. Instead, it is a bill that has a couple different pieces that show up in Secure 2.0, like multiple employer 403Bs, are in here. There's certain things on how you correct for sort of automatic contribution arrangements and other types of failures. There's a big thing for MEPs as well for the small employer pension startup credit. There's this wonky thing that I've heard about like 3 times in the last 2 days, people asking questions, because there's rules about who's eligible for the credit. And if you come into a plan that already exists, it's a PEP. In short, it's a lot of words. What does this mean? It means the Senate gears are starting to move. The House, you have Ways and Means who's reported out Secure 2.0. It will pass the House at some point here as well. But then it gets to the Senate. In the Senate, we are having hearings like the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. You're seeing things like the Retirement Security and Savings Act from Senators Portman and Cardin coming back out again. All these bills have a lot of common things, such as the 403B MEPs. Like some of them have 403B collective investment trusts, a lot about enhancing savings solutions, a lot about flexibility in plans. As I've said before, it's a Christmas tree. But each tree looks a little different. It's like when you go to that lot at Christmas and say, which tree do I really want? But in the end, it's very likely that a lot of this will be rolled up sometime maybe late summer or into the fall in the Senate when they start to really put together what their version is. And eventually, whether it's the Secure 2.0 from the House they decide to go with, or they bring in their own tweaks and changes, and then it goes back to the House, and the House approves it, or they do a conference committee. The key takeaway, we're looking at another retirement bill likely this year, especially because it shows bipartisanship as you turn into an election year. Mr. Walsh, collectively, have I hit everything correctly? Do you trust in it?
Yeah. So, David, I think you hit on kind of all the key points there. What I think is really interesting with this is that, it's bipartisan legislation in the Senate that increases access to pooled employer plans. And not only does it increase access, but it's trying to make sure that there's more credits available for small employers who join pooled employer plans. And we've seen similar provisions on a bipartisan basis in the House. So it would seem as though legislators are, continuing to be supportive of the idea that, PEPs can increase coverage, that PEPs can help, bring down costs in some ways, and that PEPs, what was a comment from Grassley? Government should be doing everything it can to help Americans save more of their hard-earned money. So it seems as though there's support for PEPs there. And what I find somewhat surprising is we've been waiting on PEP guidance from the Labor Department for a while in some areas. So there may be a disconnect between, how much support, the president and Congress and how much they want PEPs to take off, and then the Labor Department's views on the same thing.
Gentlemen, can I just ask a quick question? And thanks again for that, breaking that down. Really important for our listeners to understand that things are moving along. From a milestone point of view, when does Congress go on their their summer vacation?
Well, they usually the month of August is far and away, but there's lots of other breaks. And I'm not going to say vacation, Mr. Snyder.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to because I'm sure many members will say they are always working.
Yes, I apologize.
But and we could talk about the congressional schedule, but the reality is a lot of it is designed as home time to be home in their districts.
Yeah.
So there is a lot there's a lot of time throughout the calendar, but August is usually a time when Congress just isn't here. Kevin, you want to add more granularity, or does that work for you?
Well, so a lot of it depends on when they finish up, must pass legislation. But they do try to have a number of state work periods, and we joke in D.C. that they're on vacation. But, in reality, their job is to represent their districts and their home states, and a great way for them to understand the views of their voters is to go visit. So they've got the big state work period that we're focused on is typically the August state work period. And it's scheduled for August 9th, September 10th right now, but, those things change.
Yeah, and I guess I just pretty much by my comments, I guaranteed that neither Chuck Grassley, Maggie Hassan, or Senator Langford will be joining the program, or that for that matter, anybody.
Well, Jeff, I'm going to add one thing.
Yeah.
There's sort of one wild card out here. One of our favorite words is favorite phrases is back in play, the federal debt limit.
Oh,
because
yeah,
right now it's suspended through the end of July. Suspended means that there's really no cap and it's unlimited and open. But this is where we always have our endless throwdowns, no matter who's in office, what we're going to do on these. So, summer, who knows where we land? We'll have to find out.
Absolutely. Great teaser. Gentlemen, thanks so much for breaking this down. Appreciate you, again, starring in the A block. Great to have you, as always. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
We collectively, we think.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to talk healthcare. Joining us on the line, she is the healthcare editor for Business Insider, and also the editor of Dispense, the newsletter that wraps up all the healthcare news each and every week. Lydia Ramsey Flanzer. Lydia, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on this beautiful morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to talk to you. So let's talk about what's going on in healthcare, and there's so much going on, whether it's vaccines, whether it's mask mandates. But J.P. Morgan is in the news again. I think when we last spoke about them with you, they were part of this Haven, alliance with, I think I was going to say Jimmy Buffett, but Warren Buffett. It wasn't Warren Buffett, J.P. Morgan, and Amazon. But there's some new developments from J.P. Morgan in terms of healthcare.
Yeah, so they're taking another stab at it. It's interesting because, the last time they did this was with Haven, which disbanded back in February. And you're right, it was between Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, and Amazon. And the three of them came together and were like, okay, we got to take on, I think Warren Buffett called it the tapeworm that is the American healthcare industry, and just like the rising costs associated with it. But that didn't work for a number of reasons. But basically, JP Morgan came out this week and said, hey, we want to try this again. This time they're just doing it with an internal business unit, so no joint venture. Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway are off doing their own thing. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. They've hired on Dan Mendelsohn, who was last at Avalier, which is in DC, and kind of keeping an eye on healthcare costs and doing research on that. So that'll be interesting to see what he brings to the table. And just in general, like the approach this time is still quite broad, but a little bit more focused of, okay, we want to partner with existing health companies, whether that's, CVS, the CEO was quoted in the press release, or whether it's a tiny startup that's got a cool idea. Those are the people JP Morgan wants to work with and pilot on its employees to see if they could do something interesting for employer health insurance, or healthcare, I guess, even more broad than insurance. In the same way that we've seen like a lot of really interesting ideas percolate around like Medicare Advantage, just because there's a lot to be done there too.
Lydia, in terms of Amazon, I mean, they just don't go away and say, okay, we're going to bury our head in the sand, put our hands up, and we're done, right? They, I think, probably will continue to explore the space as well. I mean, if they can do anything remotely close to what they did with retail and originally book buying, gosh knows what they could possibly do with healthcare.
Right, and it's interesting. So this is kind of where Haven got a little stuck, was Amazon, to your point, like has been figuring out what it could mean for the healthcare industry. Obviously, it bought PillPack a few years back, but where it kind of ended up butting heads a little bit with Haven was in its clinic or its medical care program. So that's Amazon Care. My reporter Blake Dodge has written a lot on this. Like basically, they set up these clinics in the Seattle area, and they're expanding those to a couple of their geographies this summer. And they're doing virtual care as well. And it was kind of similar to what Haven was working on too. This idea of like, hey, can we provide better primary care for our employees? But Amazon wanted to kind of do it itself and bring its own ideas. So there was some drama there for sure.
Yeah, well, we laugh, but it is true. I mean, look, these are big companies with big balance sheets and their own ideas and strategies, and sometimes it kind of runs counter. They want to work together. I think the MO is right, and that they're true to that. But sometimes when you kind of put it into practice, practically, it just doesn't always work out. So hopefully, best of luck to both of them, and hopefully we can get some good results there. Lydia, one other story that, I mean, you write a lot of really good stuff, you and the team, but one other area that I saw that you were really focused on this week, which was the mask mandates. We have some new rules that I think that came out from the Center for Disease Control around who, what, where, how do you wear your mask, when do you wear your mask? Is it can private businesses mandate? Can employers' business mandate? What did you find in that in terms of writing that article?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't candidly covered it a ton, but I'm excited to see this kind of new rule come from the CDC that we can kind of, for people who are fully vaccinated, of which I am one of those people, we can be a little bit more lax with our mask wearing. It kind of reminds me of maybe we should have before, but during flu season, we don't typically wear masks everywhere. And obviously comparing flu to the coronavirus is quite fraught. But in this case, I think it's really interesting to think about, we've gone a year and a half or so where masks have just become a part of our normal life. And so it's remarkable how quickly I've seen colleagues and friends get excited about not having to wear these masks anymore. Not a lot of sticking around. It's interesting to watch how everybody is approaching it. Experts were telling one of our reporters this week that it's a little broad, the CDC guidelines of just like anybody who's vaccinated, and that means 2 weeks after your second dose, or after 2 weeks after your one dose if you got the Johnson & Johnson one. It's a little broad, and it's a little worrisome when you think about, I still see people masking around kids, and that's critical because obviously they're not vaccinated at the same rates yet. Hopefully one day. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where the case counts go from here. Can we keep case counts down as we start to get more relaxed in our masking rules?
I'm a big hockey fan, Lydia, and I saw that the Carolina Hurricanes, so I live in North Carolina, I think, as you know, in the Charlotte area, but the Carolina Hurricanes play in Raleigh, and I saw that they had a game with all of their fans, which I thought was, like we have been experiencing professional sports. If they do allow fans, it's like 10%, 20%. And for the first time here, as far as I can tell, this is really the first time here that fans can be in attendance. And when I was watching, I didn't watch the game, but I saw highlights because I'm not a Carolina Hurricanes fan. But I hope they don't do well against my Capitals, but that's a whole nother issue. But they were not wearing masks and whatnot. So it's going to be interesting to see how this applies in not only states, but also local governments and the different restrictions or protocols that exist, depending on if you're in Raleigh or Charlotte or Hickory or some of the other towns that surround the area.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be tricky. But, the optimist in me is really hopeful that this will help boost vaccine numbers, seeing that like, oh, cool, I could trade in my mask if I just get this shot. Like, I think I would take that choice, and I'm sure lots of other people will. So I'm hopeful that's kind of the outcome here too, is that more people get the vaccine that's very available at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm wondering just last question here, I'm wondering what the process is. I'm sure that given the kind of reopenings that are happening sporadically around the country, the CDC is going to watch, and other health leaders, maybe local health leaders as well, will watch what cases do. So will they spike? Will they come back? And then we'll be able to get guidance relatively quickly. Okay, well, it's spiking here, so we need to maybe go back to masks, or we need to maybe not go into the office for a week or 2 weeks. I still go back to the 15 days to stop the spread, which is what they were saying back in March of 2020, right? It was just 15 days, right? I remember the Vice President Pence sitting there, and he was like, 15 days to stop the spread. He had like a little 8x11 sheet, and it said, it was a big, and then here we are 14 months later. So I wonder what that's going to look like with all the data flowing in, and whether or not they're going to adjust protocols on the fly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's kind of, we see this play out in other countries where they'll kind of leave lockdown and go back in. And that was kind of always the expectation for the U.S. And we never got case counts low enough to be able to do something like that. But you did see it in some places. I know in the winter months, especially when there's that spike, places like New York stopped doing indoor dining, or I don't even know if they ever started. And places around me in Denver also started kind of shutting back down. And so that's kind of like where we should be as a nation. We should be comfortable with saying, hey, you don't need to wear masks for these next few months, but hey, maybe in the fall we might have to wear masks again. And we just have to start getting comfortable with that, because it's really great to think about if we start to have those skills, we can be prepared for not that we're out of this pandemic, but we can be more prepared for the next time something like this happens as well.
Yeah, certainly good advice. Well, Lydia, excuse me, I almost called you Lindy. Lydia, we're going to leave it there. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to check in on what's going on in the real estate market. Look, those interest rates are going up, down, side to side, you name it. But better to break that down than Jacob Passy. He's a real estate reporter, and he also covers a few other areas. Jack of all trades, master of some, for Market Watch. Jacob, great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as always. And I know today I think you want to talk a little about real estate, or a lot about real estate. What's top of mind this week?
Yeah, so I mean, as you kind of already mentioned, interest rates are on the move. So this week we saw interest rates on mortgage rates jump back up. So they've been falling for basically a couple months now, and this week the benchmark rate on the 30-year fixed rate mortgage averaged 3% again. So it's back at the 3% mark. And that's, because of some, hints we got from the Federal Reserve this week on, what their plan is. So the Fed released the minutes of their most recent meeting back in late April. And according to those minutes, they said that some participants, some people who, Federal Reserve, on the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee who make determinations regarding, the central bank strategy, they, a few of them are ready to start talking about, tapering their asset purchases. So, what does that all mean? So, since the pandemic began, the Fed has been very aggressive in, creating monetary policy that would support the economy and help us get through this tough spot. And as part of that, they've been, buying way more assets. And those assets, by and large, are, bonds and, different types of securities. In particular, they've been buying a lot of mortgage-backed securities. So that was good news over this past year for the housing market, because the reason why mortgage rates were able to fall to the record lows that they fell to throughout last year and at the start of this year is because in large part of those purchases that the Fed was making. By buying those securities, basically what the Fed is doing is pumping a lot of liquidity into the mortgage market. So, lenders have more money to lend, they can cut their rates down, et cetera, and not have to worry too much about their profitability. But, if the Fed does, if these hints that they made in this, this last meeting prove to be true, then, in a few months, or so, they might start, tapering off those purchases, buying less of those securities. And that would mean more money is flowing into the mortgage market from the Fed. And so lenders will have to, change up their strategies. And the way they'll change it up is by increasing interest rates. So, in the future, rates are going to go up almost definitively as the economy improves. But until the Fed really makes an announcement, we're still a ways away from any sort of announcement like that. There's probably going to be a lot of volatility. Rates are going to go up and down a lot because, the folks who, lenders are responding to what's going on in the broader market for bonds and stuff. And, investors are very skittish in that market. So they'll flock to it if they think that things are looking good and get out of Dodge if things are looking bad. So, and that'll have an effect on interest rates.
That'll be interesting. I like, for those people that watch the Federal Reserve and the comment is their path forward is quite uncertain. Well, I don't think you have to work for the Fed to even remotely offer up that that type of comment, right? But what if you're a buyer? Let's just put ourselves in the mind of a buyer. You're seeing rates go down. You're seeing rates now go back up. How do you make a decision on whether or not it's to move forward? You can never time the market, right? I mean, we can never time the market. I think they teach you that in just 101, right, in school, and so people can't always be assured of getting the lowest rate possible. But if you're out there trying to buy a piece of property, you're seeing prices of properties go up. Maybe you're a first-time buyer. Maybe you are a repeat buyer. How do you process all this information? Do you process this information, or you just go out and say, hey, I'm going to go buy a property regardless?
Totally. No, it's a difficult situation made no easier by the fact that, today, Friday, as you and I are talking, the latest existing home sales report came out that showed that homes have hit a record high again. Home prices have hit a record high again. So, it's not getting any cheaper. The home prices are rising because of the lack of inventory in the market, which is a continued issue. The good news is that part of the problem does seem to be rectifying itself a little bit. When I talk to economists at Realtor.com and other places, they say that they're seeing more sellers coming into the market, more people who already own homes putting their homes up for sale, which, should reduce some of that pressure. because the reason prices are going up so high is there's just nothing to buy out there right now. So everyone's competing for the same, 2 or 3 homes or whatever it might be in a market. And that just, naturally causes price increases. So that will reduce some of the pressure. But, you're right that it's really tough. And I guess, my advice to someone buying a home right now would be, part of the process, obviously, in buying a home is at some point you get a lender. If you're buying, with a mortgage, if you're all cash, you don't have to worry about this. Although, then you're pretty lucky comparatively.
Yeah.
But if you're relying on a mortgage, you want to talk to the lender about, rate locks and, how that works. I have a friend who's buying a home and, she's in a particular situation where the actual closing is going to be somewhat delayed compared to a normal closing, just because she's trying to, make it easier for that was one of the conditions from the seller, was that they wanted a delayed closing. So for her, though, that has created some problems because with her mortgage lender, she can get a rate lock for a certain period of time, but eventually that expires and then the lender has to go, to the prevailing rate. So she's been going back and forth about what to do because what the lender said was an extended rate lock, beyond what they're normally giving, which is, maybe 30, 60 days or what have you. They charge a fee to get an extended rate lock. And so, that fee is, a percentage of the value of the home. And it's, thousands of dollars. So, depending on, perhaps rates, stay the same. And then you're, wasting that money essentially. Or maybe rates even go down. And then you actually benefit from, the rate lock having expired. So it's a gamble. But I would first off check how long the rate locks are with your lender that you're planning on working with, to, have that in your mind and, determine, what that means for your closing window and things like that. Things are going quickly. I mean, that's an exception to the rule, the scenario I just laid out. I would say, the most homes are flying off the market in, a couple of weeks or so across the country. It is that crazy right now. And so, I would say probably sellers are moving quickly, but sellers have to find a place to live themselves usually, so that's the issue here. And then from there, in terms of your budgeting and going into the home search process, there is what your lender will approve you for. Obviously, they will pre-approve you to buy a certain size home, basically value wise. But I would factor in, if you're worried about the cost of interest, just assume it's going to be higher than it is now, because the worst that happens is it's lower than you expect, and then you're saving money. Don't go in assuming that you'll be able to get a record low mortgage rate 6 months from now. Factor into your budgeting and what you can afford, over the duration of the loan and on a monthly basis. Factor in, a higher interest rate into those calculations. There are tons of mortgage rate calculators available online that can help you figure out what your monthly payment will be. So just determine what you can afford. Give yourself a cushion. You also want that cushion because you don't want to get in over your head. We are in a situation right now where there are so many bidding wars happening for homes that it's really easy to get caught up in the emotions of that and then quickly find yourself offering a price that you can't actually afford. So, give yourself a cushion and, if that is, figure out what your, absolute maximum is in terms of a budget. And then, I would say cut it down even lower than that and have that be the upper limit on what you'll look for just in case you get into a bidding war situation. In other words, if you say I can only afford a $200,000 home, you shouldn't be necessarily touring homes where the asking price is $200,000 because chances are they will, bid up higher than that. So, give yourself as much cushioning as possible in as many ways as possible, and you should be good financially. It may make it tougher from a home search perspective, but, there's no point in buying a home that you'll only end up having to sell or worse because you can't afford to make the monthly payments.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I would also recommend that people take some Pepto-Bismol in case they can't stomach the up and down of the of the market. Jacob, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we really appreciate having you on the channel each and every week to break down so many different topics. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk technology, and that's a very broad term, but today we're going to focus on streaming. A lot going on in the media world. Joining us on the line, he's lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. You can find him on 7investing.com, does his own show. I'm talking about Daniel Klein. Dan, great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
So Jeff, learned a lesson in the news business this week. This happens all the time. But it's Sunday night, like 8 o'clock. I'm thinking about, maybe topics for Monday's show, and AT&T drops a bomb. They are unloading Warner Media. Now, Warner Media is HBO, it's CNN, it's TNT and TBS. It's a lot of channels. And they're combining it with Discovery. AT&T shareholders will end up owning about 70% of the company. Discovery will own about 30%. But Discovery's CEO is actually going to lead the combined company. This is basically AT&T admitting it made a giant mistake. The finances on this are a little unclear, but they paid roughly $85 billion for these assets, and they're losing, I don't know, somewhere in the $20 or $30 billion range just to divest from it. This was always a bad deal. They were never a good steward for these properties, as John Oliver has endlessly told us on Last Week Tonight. And I'm not sure I like what they've done with it at all.
Yeah, so I guess just kind of unpacking this a little bit, should telephone, telco, connectivity companies be in the media business other than distributing media? I think that's kind of a lesson here, right, Dan? I mean, AT&T, by all accounts, does I think a good job with its network and connectivity, and I actually use them, by the way, for our internet service here at the studio. But should they really be in this business of media and the connectivity?
So it's a question of, I understand why they wanted to control content and use content as a draw to their services.
Yeah.
But if you do that, it's not like you could say, hey, CNN is exclusive to AT&T customers. So I don't see it as a big draw. I see the same issue with like Spotify bought The Ringer, which is a popular website with some really big sports and entertainment podcasts. But they can't make those podcasts exclusive because if they do, they're going to lose their audience. So I never thought this made a lot of logical sense. And really what happened is AT&T bought these companies and they really ran them separately. So it wasn't necessary. It was very much like Verizon buying Yahoo and some of the other properties they just sold off. It wasn't that logical a fit. But I don't like what they did with it. So, okay, great. AT&T gets out of it. AT&T is not a company I would invest in. A lot of people own AT&T because it's been a dividend-paying company. I don't buy shares in companies that don't treat their customers well and customer service. So that rules out AT&T and Verizon. T-Mobile, in my case, is the winner in this space. I don't own T-Mobile, though, because there's such a heavy infrastructure investment. The second you're done with 5G, you have to start building 6G. So even though I do think T-Mobile is an excellent, well-run company, I just kind of stay away from this space. But let's look at the new company they've created. I don't know what we're going to call it. Let's call it Discover Warner Media. Like, they haven't told us what the name is yet because this is going to take a long time. It's going to be 2022, maybe well into 2022 before this actually happens. So in the streaming world, everyone has the idea of we need content so we can catch up to Netflix and Disney. I think this is a flawed premise. I don't think buying a lot of content is going to make you a viable competitor because there isn't enough good IP out there. If you see things like Peacock, which has a huge library of content, really not make a ripple, and HBO Max can't even get people already paying for HBO to sign up for HBO Max. So, and it's free for them.
Yep.
So I don't think just adding more to that. And what really pains me here is I thought that Discovery Plus was exactly the right niche product. So Discovery Plus with ads costs $4.99 a month. And with that, you get all the cooking content, your Guy Fieri's, your Bobby Flay's. You get all the HGTV content, all those house flipping shows and House Hunters. You get Magnolia Network, which is Chip and Joanna Gaines. It's sort of like an endless array of mildly enjoyable background content. You get the 90 Day Fiancé. universe, which is a shocking amount of shows. For $4.99, that felt to me like a really good value. Like, we'll throw on House Hunters or Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, like, while we're both working on the couch and not necessarily engaged in television, sort of like in the hour before we watch something we actually intend to watch. And for me, that $4.99 was really worth it. And in a world where we're all going to start making some choices as to what streaming services we have, and let's assume we're all going to have Netflix, we are all going to have Disney Plus. We are mostly going to have Amazon Prime, not that we bought it for the video. So that's 3. If you argue that we might get a couple more, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, price is going to matter, and Discovery Plus was a great value. I'm not sure that there's any combo of the HBO Time Warner assets that really marry that well with Discovery Plus. So, what are you going to do? Add Discovery Plus to HBO Max and not charge more? Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's a $14.99 subscription. You're not going to. So I don't see how you run these combined companies. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. Let's say you have a really successful sporting goods store. It makes sense if you start selling, open a smoothie bar. It doesn't make that much sense if you, put in a steakhouse. Like, these things just aren't related. So I look at this was just AT&T wanted to unravel its company. Discovery wanted to make a go big or go home kind of play. And I don't know. I think this is going to end up being sold off for parts.
Yeah. I just go back to, Dan, I'm not in the news. I'm not in the telecom business. I'm in the content creation business. My job is to come up with excellent content that our subscribers, listeners, audience wants to hear. I think that's a specialized skill. You've got to understand where the market's going, and just throwing, and I would argue, Dan, and I want to go to the second article topic in a second, but I would argue that, like Netflix, I have a hard time, Dan, finding things on Netflix that I want to watch. A lot of it looks like a bunch of not good stuff.
Yeah, so I think Netflix is a fundamentally flawed company. That doesn't mean it's not going to be successful. It is successful. Disney, I look at as a perfect content company. Every show Disney makes performs as expected or better. They don't have to tell you that a new Star Wars show is coming. The media is more than happy to do that. Netflix throws a million things at the wall, and they'd probably argue demographic success for a lot of them. And we've talked this many times. I think Netflix shoots itself in the foot because it puts out a piece of content. That piece of content is successful, and it doesn't have a life cycle because they release all the episodes at once. So every episode of The Mandalorian or WandaVision is an event that gets covered on all the entertainment media. That there's post podcasts, and there's all sorts. Whereas Stranger Things comes out and it's a 72-hour news cycle, and you never know when you can talk about it with your friends because some of them binge watched it in a weekend and some watch 1 or 2 episodes a week. So I think Netflix has huge management problems. I think they waste billions of dollars. And I do think Disney Plus actually ultimately becomes the leader. But Netflix is using sort of a variation of the network television model that, even though it leads to a ton of failure, it does work in the long run. I mean, look, we still watch a lot of ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox.
Yeah. So Dan, let's talk about this study, this survey that basically says that the average American is going to subscribe to only 5 streaming services by 2024. First, are there only going to be 5? And what do you make of this survey?
So I think 5 is about right. So I think a lot of us are going to have some sort of live streaming. So Sling or Hulu Live or YouTube TV or some variation of a skinny bundle from a cable company. I think we're going to want local networks. If you have kids in school, you need to know the school closings, the weather, that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to have that. I think by default, we all have Amazon Prime. Then you're going to have Netflix and Disney Plus, because as much as I'm not a big Netflix fan, my wife watches a million things on Netflix, and she's totally open to just starting a new show because, a friend of hers watched it. I'm a little more discerning than that. And then I think it's going to be a dogfight, and I do think we're going to have some consolidation. I don't think Paramount Plus has a big chance of succeeding. I don't think Peacock has a big chance of succeeding. Maybe the Olympics will be a bump for them if the Olympics happen, but I don't think there's anything must-see. I don't think HBO Max is must-see. No. So I do think you're either going to see some of these companies, and my guess would be CBS, gives up and says we could make more money licensing Star Trek to Netflix or to somebody else, I think you're going to see more of that. We already saw the WWE network say, okay, you know what? Peacock will give us significantly more money than we're making to roll our content into Peacock, and it'll be cheaper for our fans to get it. We'll make more money, and we don't have to produce as much content. You're going to see more of that. I'm not so sure all these little niche services will make sense, and we're seeing some fringe efforts. There's some big time former executives that formed a company, and its name escapes me, but where basically you spend a monthly fee and you get X amounts of credits you can use to watch programming across 30 or 40 different niche content providers. You might see something like that. But I think the world has gotten very, very complicated. There's so many choices, and it's why I'm not a big believer in, say, like Pluto TV or any of the free services. I'm not sure aggregating 800 channels of garbage, Manimal reruns and Give Me a Break episodes, and the old Alf talk show. I'm not so sure that's all that necessary. And is there good programming there? Sure, there absolutely is. But is it needle in a haystack? Yeah. So I think 5 is about right. But I think the next wave, and I would have said look to TiVo to do this, but I don't think they've gained a lot of traction with their pretty cool streaming device, is the next wave is figuring out how to aggregate all the content and do much better recommendation engines. We need someone to tell us, hey, Dan, I see you watch mostly superhero shows. You might want to watch this one. Or here's something. And right now, it's as bad as Amazon's book recommendations. Amazon doesn't even know to tell me you might want to read the sequel to the book you've read 10 books in the series of. Yeah. So I think that's the next level, but we're going to see consolidation. And, I don't think we're going to put up with more than 5 subscriptions.
Well, I think I echo some of what you've said. I mean, I think it's, you mentioned you mentioned Pluto and being 800 channels. I do think that the UI, the user interface for a lot of these systems, including Netflix, including Amazon, I can't find anything that I like. I wind up going, Dan, to the recently added section, whether it's called that in Netflix or Amazon or HBO Go, and I just check that every couple days, every week, to see if there's something I like. But for the most part, I haven't liked anything in a while, and I'm devoting more of my time to YouTube or reading a book, Dan, a real book.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and I'll give an example of where it fails. So I am not a big HBO Max user, but HBO Max has a new series from Michael Che, the guy from Saturday Night Live, and if Twitter knows what I watch and Facebook knows what I'm into, I'm not entirely sure why HBO Max doesn't know that I watch Saturday Night Live every week, and I would probably enjoy a topical sketch comedy show from one of its head writers and one of its lead performers. I only discovered this show because I was alone in the house in Orlando, had nothing to watch. We don't have live TV there, and I'm like, oh, I bet that's a Michael Che comedy special. I'll watch that. And then I learned it was a series. It got no promotion. It basically doesn't exist. As far as I'm concerned, that shouldn't be how things are done. There needs to be a much more Disney-like focus on good content. I'm not so sure that 10 shows is better than one if that one show is a name brand or a famous star that can actually get some media attention for it.
Yeah. Well, Dan, really interesting conversation, and I think a lot of people have a lot to take away. Streaming is definitely in. It's cool, and it's the future. Dan Klein, great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week.
I'll see you next week, Jeff.
Thanks. Bye-bye. And that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for another educational, exciting, and, of course, entertaining edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.